a genre of the dramatic arts that seeks to elicit a response from within an array of dark emotions: fear, anxiety, disgust, paranoia, terror, stress, gallows humor, etc.
Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. It is a Friday in March, which means, of course, that winter is slowly coming to its end. I cannot wait for that because this is my least favorite time of the year. But as a consolation prize, I am joined today by author Allan Gunnells. Mark is the author of The Quarry, Dark Treats, Summer of Winters, and most recently, a novel called 2B. He's also a prolific short story writer, and there's collections of his short work that are also available for those of you who I know are just inching your way into horror fiction from the horror film side of the landscape. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, that's not true of all my guests, so we're off to a good start. So if someone was brand new to your world, how would you go about introducing yourself?
Well, I am a child of the 80s and a lifelong horror fan. So I feel like my work sort of harkens back to that traditional 80s kind of horror, but with what I hope is a modern twist on it, which is probably a generic answer that lots of people give.
Actually, the funniest thing is that how we define ourselves tends to be less specific than how other people define us.
True.
So that, of course, leads to the next question, which tells us a lot more about you because it's a lot less guarded, which is, how did you get into all this madness? How'd you get bit by the horror bug?
Well, as a fan of your show, I knew this question was coming, so I've given it some thought. But I can kind of narrow it down to three things from my early childhood. And I'll start out by saying I grew up in a very permissive household in that I could watch anything I wanted basically from birth. There were no limits. And one of my earliest memories is my family watching the original Salem's Lot miniseries when it first aired in 1979. And they let me watch with them. I was 5. And some of those scenes are still ingrained in my memory from that first watching as a child. And later, I think I was about 10, they were showing The Exorcist on television, and my mother told me I could watch it with her. I did end up about halfway through hiding behind the sofa, and she sent me to bed. But I still remember that. And then probably that same year, my older sister had a slumber party and had all her friends over, and they watched Friday the 13th Part 2 and let me hang out in the back of the room. And I still remember that final jump scare of the movie, and all the girls screamed and reared back. And I think what those three instances showed me was that there is real power in horror. Because I was watching a lot of different things. Most of them have faded from my memory. But the horror stuff, that stayed with me. I mean, I'm 46 now, and I still vividly remember those things. So to me, there was just such a power and it had an impact in a way that other stuff I was watching didn't. And so when I got older and started to read, I was naturally drawn to horror. And then when I started to write, that just seemed the natural progression in the direction for me to go.
I agree that horror is uniquely situated to really speak to especially young people, because I think that we're trying to figure out the world as you know, a preteen or a teenager. We're trying to figure out the boundaries. We're often accused at that age of feeling like we're immortal, but the reality is, I think we're more scared of all the things that can hurt us than at any other time in our lives. And horror films just seem like an exploration and also a challenge. I don't think they're truly therapeutic. People say that all the time. And I think that kind of demeans real medicine, to be honest. But I think the process of simply facing down things is important at that age.
I agree. I think that there's something about watching something in sort of a safe context that maybe you can't really deal with something directly, but through this sort of fictional world, like you said, it's not therapy, but it sort of, I think it can help you adjust to things because you get to do it in more of a safe environment where that fear isn't really directed at yourself, but at what you're watching or reading.
Of course, the exception to that would be if you ever got to see any of those films on a 42nd Street Grindhouse theater, then you probably weren't safe. In addition,
well,
but it wasn't from what was on screen. So I know that my early novels that brought me into horror and collections, because I think anthologies played a very important early role, especially the Charles L. Grant Shadows anthologies for myself, but they came secondhand to me. So I consider it a minor miracle that I landed where I did, because if I would walked up to a different yard sale that day or a different library sale that day, the different books would have been lying there, right? Yeah. But I do feel that the chances of me being a big Western fan are probably pretty thin, right? So how do you feel? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it what's books on the blanket on the yard? What got the literary side rolling?
Well, I mean, I really think because I fell in love with the movies first, that when I got into reading, it just seemed a natural progression. I mean, this isn't the most original answer, but the writer that first really got me in was Stephen King. And I think that was because his movies were everywhere. I've often said Stephen King is the only writer that I literally don't ever remember not knowing his name. Like, again, one of my earliest memories is watching the Salem's Lot miniseries. So I always knew that name. So I started checking his books out at the library. And I fell in love with that. And I thought, as much as I love movies, the literary horror, the written word, I thought got into much deeper and darker places. So I started reading everything I could of him, and that led me to other authors. I discovered Clive Barker, whereas Stephen King appealed to me because he took horror out of the like Gothic castles and the foggy moors and just put it down the street. Clive Barker offered me visions that were boldly original and wild and erotic and like nothing I had ever experienced before.
Yeah, he was actually challenging the social structure. Like,
yeah,
King didn't. King was pulling the horror and the anxieties of the day out proper, but Barker was actually suggesting that there's deeper horrors under all that, maybe foundational to the society.
And that was one thing I loved about horror was you could get so much different kinds, because then I also started reading Anne Rice, which was all about extravagance and excessiveness. And I could go to different authors for different needs. And I also fell in love with a lot of anthologies. I remember reading anthologies like Under the Fang and Books of the Dead and Shock Rock and things like that. And just being amazed by all the different things that horror authors can do. And then I know you can relate to this. I discovered the Del Abyss line of horror books when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And that was some of the best and most, I don't want to say transgressive, but it was so diverse and interesting and rich and not your typical, John Saul kind of horror. That, I just absolutely, I remember being like sort of heartbroken when that line finally folded, because I felt I could always go to it.
Yeah, they were like the bedrock. They were the equivalent of the Friday 13th movies for me, which is so funny because they're so vastly different in their own context. But like growing up, I didn't have a ton of friends, but every summer Jason was there. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like he was my friend. Okay, I want to make that clear. I was on the wrong side of the betting war there, but it was something I could rely on for entertainment. It was constant for my formative years. Del Abyss after that pretty much picked up, and the timetable works perfect because the Friday stopped being made and Del Abyss starts up. And it was just one of those periods, like every time I walked into a Borders, every 2 months, there was something new there. And I was buying a book a week, but I knew when it had the Del Abyss symbol on the spine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even read the backs after a while. I was just, done. Mastery, I have no idea what this is. Ron D. Descent, buying it. That's all it was because I trusted the line.
Yeah. Even now, if I go to a used bookstore, I'm going down those spines looking for that distinctive symbol there because it really was during a time, and that was around the time that I really was getting serious about writing myself. And to me, it was aspirational. I'm like, these are the kinds of people that I want to be a part of that group. I want to not copy or mimic them, but I want to follow my own passion and create stories that are as interesting as the stories I'm getting out of this line. And it was also so revolutionary to me because, that was the age of a lot of the straight to paperback horror.
Yeah.
You had zebra horror and things like that. Those weren't necessarily known for their quality. But like this was a line that really cared about quality work, and authors that I still admire and revere and follow today, I discovered there.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone knows how I feel, so I don't want to belabor my feelings on it, but Del Abyss are as important as it gets to me. It goes Charles L. Grant, then the Del Abyss books, and then the Borderlands anthology in terms of convincing me that this is something I really wanted to be a part of in my own small way, whatever I'm capable of, right? Because, jury's still out on that. But it's funny because just a few people are able to really make moves that change this entire genre on the lit side anyway. And I think that's really aspirational to me too, because even Stephen King, who I tend to be kind of reserved in my praise of, which people don't understand. I think it's just because he gets enough of it everywhere else that, very important to me too in those early years. Night Shift was one of those first books, but he gets the press everywhere else. I'd rather spend the time highlighting other people that perhaps we don't talk about it much. I'd rather, frankly, talk about Melody Tim than Stephen King any day of the week. That's just me.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of great voices out there. So the Del Abyss line ends pretty much in 96. You're writing. You're probably going through a lot of self-addressed stamped envelopes at this point in your career, right? So if you don't know, so those early rejections, I know we all kind of love and hate them, but can you kind of take us through like how that process felt and how you stuck with it? Because a lot of people don't. A lot of people quit at that stage.
Yeah, luckily I'm stubborn because I got a lot of rejection early on, and I mean much of it deserved. But that was in the days where like I would get the big writer's market book, and
Yes.
sometimes you had to do it twice. You had to send a self-addressed stamped envelope to get them to mail you their guidelines, and then you had to send one when you sent the story, so you would pay for them to reject you. And there were a lot of little horror magazines I was trying to get into, getting a lot of form rejection letters, and probably a lot of it, I didn't know much of anything about proper formatting back then. I didn't have a computer. I had a word processor which kids might not even know what that is. But
Panasonic 5700.
so, I'm sure they were a mess. Some of them probably didn't even get read because and I didn't, my word processor wouldn't like count words. So I literally would print it out and I would count all the words to get the word count.
Was it life-changing when someone said, just say 250 for every page?
I did hear that somewhere, and I'm like, okay, that's because I was counting. But even the word processor though, I started on a typewriter because that's how old I am. And I never liked the typewriter because I make too many mistakes. But yeah, so I was just getting rejection after rejection. But I was young and I had that, I don't know, that weird confidence that's born of nothing, where I just thought like, well, of course I'm gonna make it. Like, this is just what you have to go through. And but I just kept doing it. And I mean, it was a long, long time before I finally got an acceptance. And I think what really kept me doing it was just because I love it. Like, I wanted to get published, I wanted to get read, but I also just loved telling stories. I loved getting an idea and fleshing it out and making it come to life on the page. So that kept me going even when I wasn't getting any, not only any acceptances, but not really even any feedback from the rejections to help me get a better idea. I mean, I kept going so long that eventually, like, the internet grew up and I started finding you could start email submitting. And my first acceptance was to a small e-zine, like an online magazine, where I got $14.61, but it felt like a fortune because I'm like, they just gave me $14 for something.
That's not a bad first sale. It's not a bad first sale at all.
But I had gotten so much rejection that when I got the acceptance letter, for a minute, I was confused. I'm like, what is this? Like, I don't understand. But
I thought this would be completely different.
Yeah, but it was very exciting to me, and I still have that letter framed on my desk. But so yeah, so really what kept me going was just the confidence of youth and just the pure joy I took in telling stories.
So let's zoom ahead a few years past that. 2012 is a huge year for you. So The Quarry, sequel, Dark Treats. I mean, in a real way, it must have felt like you got out of first gear finally, right?
It did. I mean, when I first started publishing, I was excited, but there would still be these kind of long gaps. Like, I would get something accepted, and then, I would have to sort of do the struggle all again to finally get something else. But then I started, I got like a string, like a domino effect. And it was exciting. It was also because I was also trying to learn the art of promotion without becoming obnoxious. So when you have several things out, the danger of becoming obnoxious increases because it seems like, well, I just finished talking about this one. Now I have to talk about this one. People are going to be sick of me. So I was learning to sort of wind my way through that maze. But it was very exciting. The Quarry was the first novel I had ever had published. And I've always been a very passionate short story lover, and short stories are my first love, probably. But I was excited to finally have a cohesive novel out. And sequel, I was so excited to have that out because that was a novel I had written actually years before and didn't think I was ever going to get published because it had been rejected by many a publisher back when I first wrote it, and I kind of put it aside. So that was exciting. And Dark Treats was a Halloween collection, and I'm a huge Halloween geek even now. So yeah, it was a very exciting year for me. That's why I'm babbling about it.
And before we go any further, that is a natural place to just throw in Dan's question here. You've written several Halloween set stories. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorites? Also, what are your fondest Halloween season memories and traditions?
Well, I think because I was such a horror kid, Halloween was like bigger than Christmas for me. Um, and it wasn't just the candy. It was that you got to dress up like monsters, and other people dressed up like monsters. And for that one time of the year,
We were
everybody was
normal.
interested. Yeah,
We weren't the
everyone.
outcasts.
Yeah, so it was so. I just loved Halloween. Um, I loved the whole concept, and I never outgrew it. Um, and so, some of my favorite Halloween memories. It's really just it was the lead up where I would decide what I was going to be, um, and going out on the. And when I was growing up in the '80s, we never went out until it was dark.
Yeah.
We went all over town because I lived in a small town anyway. But so it was just like a roaming adventure for the night where you're just going all over town, and I loved that. Sometimes I kind of miss that, and sometimes I miss that kids don't have the same experience with Halloween. Especially now that I did. But so yeah, every October, I always, whatever I'm working on, I set it aside. In October, I write Halloween short stories because I'm a big geek like that. And so I have a bunch. So that's why I have 2 Halloween collections, 2 Halloween novellas I've released. As for favorites, it's usually hard for me to pick favorites because I'm proud of all of them. But I know in Dark Treats, I have a story called Halloween Returns to Bradbury, which I really like. I really think turned out the way I had hoped that it would. I wrote a Halloween novella called #Make Halloween Scary Again a couple of years ago for the anthology for the Random House digital imprint. It was Halloween Carnival Volume 1, and I was in there in the table of contents with Robert McCammon, which was like a huge, like, freaky fanboy moment for me.
Doesn't that mess with you? Like every time I've experienced, like, wait, these are my heroes. What am I doing there? It's not real. It doesn't feel real.
It doesn't seem right. I'm like, how? I snuck in somehow. But because I've been in a couple of like charity anthologies that had Stephen King stories in them and a Neil Gaiman story, and I've been in anthologies with Clive Barker and Joe Lansdale, and I'm always like, well, somebody just left the door open and I made my way in, and they didn't kick me out, so that, good on them.
I think that's the reason that anthologies are so important, though, too, because we all know that despite the fact that the insular horror writing community loves anthologies, they don't sell well. That's kind of the horrific truth of the matter, but I think they're so important to give confidence to writers who are starting out, because there is nothing bigger than appearing with some of your heroes. And I think that if we lose that, we lose a little bit of the essential growth that's necessary. It's kind of like, listen, I was never a guy who grew up wanting to play any sports whatsoever. I could get out of playing any sport, I would get out of it that moment. But I'd be a fool not to say that dodgeball didn't teach me something, because it did. And I do think it's a necessary thing. So I think that I wouldn't get rid of phys ed in school, even though I loathed it. And in the same way, I think even though horror anthologies don't necessarily sell like we'd like them to, which, by the way, guys, everyone go out there and buy a horror anthology. Just do it. I think they're so necessary, and they're such the heartbeat of the future. I know for myself, like magazines like Pulp House and The New Blood and Twilight Zone magazine in the 80s, these were how I discovered so many writers. Some that I probably should have already known, but that's how I came across them. So I think it's really important.
And like I said, I grew up loving anthologies to the point where when I would write short stories, I would like think, this is like a shock rock story. Like this story would fit in that anthology. And like, I don't know. And so when I actually started getting into anthologies, it was really exciting to me because I'd always had such a love for them because I feel like they are a great way to discover writers. Because I might buy an anthology because I like these two writers who are in it, but then I find writers I didn't even know about, and then I go out and buy their books because of that anthology. So I don't know. It is exciting for me, and I that's why I'm still always happy to submit to anthologies and always thrilled when I appear in one.
I need to get back in the practice of writing more shorts. I do. I think you get to that point where it's like you spend all your time on longer things, and probably not the smartest move on my half, but I've never claimed to be very smart. So 2013, Summer of Winters. It's an interesting moment in the genre at that point because this is the rumblings of everything from self-publishing to, at that point, actually, POD was still a controversial issue. So the landscape is changing now massively under our feet. And you've just kind of hit your stride as this tremendous change is overcoming the industry. Can you take us through what that felt like? Because again, it's like between 2013 and then 2016, you have a collaboration, but certainly coming off of the previous year, it definitely had to seem a little less certain than that first year.
Yeah, and publishing in the small press, one of the things I like about it is that I feel like there's room for everything there.
Yeah.
That, I'll just write what I want to write and then see who wants to publish something like that. But then there also is that fear as everything is changing, like, is there going to be a home for this? And I honestly, though, I try to put that sort of thinking out of my mind when I'm writing, because I think it can mess with your head, and you can get you'll get so afraid that it messes with your creative process. And that's why I try to stay out of a lot of like industry drama that sometimes happens.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't want anything to kill my buzz when I'm writing. Like, I just want to get in the story and have fun. But once it's done, once you've got it ready, that's when, you have to worry about what's going on in the industry, who's doing what, who's judging what form of publication. But I've been lucky to sort of latch on to a few publishers that I sort of rode with for a while. And The Summer of Winters was published by Evil Jester Press, who had previously published The Quarry. And after The Quarry, they were specifically asked me if there was something else, I could give to them. And I had it's my one coming of age novel. And so luckily, they were like, do you have anything else? And I'm like, here, like this. And so, that's helped me, because there've been, over the course of my career, I've sort of, had a few, I don't know what to call them, but, because old standby sounds insulting, but publishers that have enjoyed my work enough that they've sort of asked me to submit more things to them. And, that always feels good too. And it helps sort of ease me through. Now, the thing with the small presses, sometimes then those publishers, fold or close, and then you have to find a new home. But I've been very lucky, and I really have nothing to complain about.
So that collaboration that I referenced is Where the Dead Go to Die with Aaron Dries. How did that come about? And collaboration is one of those incredibly sticky issues for a lot of writers. Like, it's hard to find exactly how to work with another person when what you do is so personal. So
Yeah.
how did that work for you?
Well, and the way I ended up collaborating with Aaron is I met him at the World Horror Convention, whose T-shirt I'm wearing.
Which city?
It was when it was in Atlanta. Because it was within driving distance of me. Because sometimes, with work and my financial situation, traveling far isn't always an option. But they had it in Atlanta. I went, and I knew Aaron a little from, Facebook and things like that. But I didn't really know him that well. But we met, we really hit it off. We had a lot of really interesting conversations. He came to the panel I was speaking on, which was on zombie fiction, because I had previously released a zombie novella called Asylum. And he was talking to me about how he had never really written any zombie fiction, but he had an idea for something that would be a little different in the zombie genre, but, with a big twist on it. And he asked me if I would want to work on that with him. And my thing about collaborations is, one, I'm always surprised when someone asks me, but I'm always flattered when someone asks me, because I actually enjoy collaborating with other people, because I feel like I always walk away a better writer, because there's always something I can learn and take away from other writers. The only thing I really look for when I collaborate with someone, I don't look for someone who has a similar style than me, because it can actually be interesting when two different styles come together. But I do look for people who have the same approach as I do, because if we approach writing very differently, that's when I feel like there could be some clash. But working with Aaron was actually a dream. That novel went very fast. And I don't know, I'm very happy with the product we have, which I think is something I never could have written on my own, and something I think he could never have written on his own. That literally, it's something born from the two of us.
That's awesome to hear, because publicly you don't hear horror stories, but in private conversations, as you know, you hear a lot different sides of things. So it's great to hear that for once at least the collaboration process actually brought out more. It left you richer than you walked in with.
Yeah, I felt that because I also collaborated with James Newman, if you're familiar with him.
Absolutely.
And I felt the same way. But again, because there are some writers I know that I really respect, but I just know their approach is so different, I don't think it would work. So, you just have to be, it's like a marriage. You got to pick the right person.
I don't think anyone could tolerate collaborating with me, so I think that's the problem. I don't write until I know the whole story, so it's like it's a lot of people who are much more pantsers could never deal with me, just never in a million years. And that's on me, that's my problem, not theirs. So, looking now, over the last few years, things have definitely picked up again for you, like in a big way. And it's funny because I think that finally social media is kind of letting us promote work without necessarily feeling like the shills that we did even 10 years ago. I came up basically through the shock lines days, whereas, message boards were everything. Mm-hmm. And as much as there was some great conversation, it also always felt like you were bombarded with people like begging you for your change. Because I have a novel, it's coming out, can you buy it? And that can get very tiring very quickly. So social media being so big today, you'd expect that to be the case. And in some cases, it definitely is. There's a few people that I've had to mute because it's like, sorry, every 10 minutes is a bit much, guys. But it's funny that there is now, I think, a meeting of the artists and the readers in a much more intimate way than ever before. Like growing up, I didn't know it for the life of me. Charles Grant lived 20 minutes from my house at that point, but I didn't know that. And I had no contact with him, but he was terribly important to me. Today, I would have found that out, because he would have been posting, if Charles was still alive, obviously. But, he'd be posting, and I would have been like, oh, my God, this guy's accessible to me. Even just booking people for the show is just a matter of reaching out. And I think that's helping build a community around horror fiction. My hope is, and this is what I want you to opine on, my hope is that by bringing the readers in, like they've never been in before, the community of horror writers will actually be able to cultivate an audience that feels that they have flesh in the game, which is something I don't think we've had since maybe the early 80s, frighteningly enough.
I mean, it is amazing to me that, like, sometimes I will post something and then, like, Joe Lansdale will comment on it. Or will share it. Or, like, I've even had, like, Neil Gaiman comment back on something. And, like, when I was growing up, that idea that I would have any interaction with these people beyond maybe a few words and a signing line was just unthinkable. So I know as a reader, it's kind of amazing to me, and I love it. I love having, not even just always one-on-one interaction, but just like getting to hear their thoughts on the business or their process or inspiration. I mean, it does make it a weirdly more intimate experience when I'm reading their work. And I also respond very well to writers who I can tell from how they interact with people are generous people, generous with their time, generous with their advice, generous with their promoting of other people. And that actually raises them up in my esteem sometimes. So as a writer myself, I always want to hear from people. And I always say, like, if you like my book, if you didn't like my book and you have your reasons, like, I want to hear from you too. I want to interact with people who read my stuff. I want to know what they like about it, what they don't. I also try because I am very conscious of not wanting to just constantly be pimping my stuff. I'm a huge enthusiastic cheerleader for the other writers that I love. Although, to be honest, I'm a huge cheerleader for the writers I don't love, because I just love writers. I love people who are out there telling the stories they want to tell. So even if I don't like it, if you have passion for it, then I celebrate that. So I'm always talking not just about myself, but about other writers, other storytellers, which I hope gives it a balance that people can respond to and get conversation started, because that's the big thing. I love when I can have conversations with other writers, and I want to be that kind of writer.
Yeah, I always we are very similar in age. I mean, like, we'd be counting months, right? So when I grew up, like, Stephen King, the guy who wrote Carrie and Salem's Lot and all those short stories and Night Shift that were so important to me, right? But I'd see him on television pimping American Express card, right? And I was like, I'm never. This guy's a space alien. I'm never going to be on the same planet as this dude.
Yeah.
But today, and he's an exception to the rule, obviously, because the media attention for decades has made it so. But it's amazing who you can reach out to, and they will respond. And I think that I really believe that's going to lead more people back to reading horror fiction. Especially since, just as you discussed at the beginning, like, horror movies were your formative experience. And I think that's true of 98% of people born after, 1970. But in the past, it was always, we weren't supposed to kind of acknowledge that. right? There was definitely decades where horror fiction was one thing and horror movies were another. And if you were on one side of the fence, you had to be careful how much you acknowledge the other side. And even you read Stephen King's Dance Macabre, which doesn't read great today because so much has changed as far as information. But when you read that book, you realize, like, you know that he liked some of the garbage more than he let on. You know, it's just that, but he couldn't say it out loud because there was a stigma. There was definitely a stigma. Today, I don't think that stigma exists. And you can talk about, you know, The Exorcist, Friday the 13th Part 2, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you're not, that doesn't make you a lesser to people. It makes you more because they can relate.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that we're no longer seeing the genre as so segmented that way. I think it's great that people read an Ed Lee novel and then will turn around and read a Douglas Winter novel.
Yeah.
You know, that's amazing to me.
Yeah. And, you know, that goes back to what I was saying before. Like, there's, like, horror is such a big genre. There's so much in it. It's not just like one thing, this is horror. And so, you know, no matter what mood I'm in, there's something I can find in the genre that's going to satisfy that. And I do hope that more readers come back to it, because I think it is richer than it's ever been. I think it's more diverse than it's ever been. I think you're going to find, you know, classical stories retold in new, fresh ways. You're going to find completely bold and unexpected ideas that will just blow your mind. So, you know, come on, join the cool kids over at the horror table.
So Root Beer and Pizza asks, what is your writing process like? Are you more of a plotter or a pantser? And go ahead, say you're a mix.
I am more a pantser than a plotter. I mean, I don't just completely tunnel in with no plan, but I don't formalize the plan, if that makes any sense. Like, I have a general idea where I'm going, but I always like to leave the freedom of not going there, of finding, because sometimes the most exciting part for me is when a story suddenly takes a turn I didn't foresee. And I love when a character that just seems kind of incidental to me sort of reveals, like, I'm more important to this story than you were giving me credit for. And so I definitely am probably more of a pantser, but a pantser with a general idea. I have written one novel, which will come out later this year, where I wrote an outline more than I ever have before. That's because it's what I call, I don't know if I made this term up, but I call it an obstacle novel, where the characters keep coming up against a series of obstacles they have to overcome. And so I felt it's pretty important that I know how they're going to overcome them all. Otherwise, I'm going to get to a certain point and realize, oh, well, there's no way out of that. So that's the most I've ever actually plotted. But I don't know. To me, I like the discoveries, because even in that novel, I had parts that surprised me even within the framework I had built. So I do love the surprises.
The reason I joke that everyone answers that they're a mix is because it's inevitable that you'll be a mix at some point. The pure pantser at some point stops and assesses what they're doing. And the person who identifies themselves as purely a plotter, at some point there's an idea that's too irresistible not to figure out how to work in.
Yeah.
So I maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the vast majority of writers can't fit nicely in either category. I mean, I don't write a story until I know, but by the same rate, there's always discovery along the way.
Yeah.
Always.
We lean more toward one side or the other, but we all have a little bit of both in us.
I do a lot of leaning because I'm lazy. Yeah. So tell us about 2B. I mean, that's the new Hotness.
Yeah, it is my new novel. It's a ghost story, and I'm really excited that it exists because it was an idea I had for like 20 years, um, that I just carried in my head, and at a certain point, it grew into sort of mythic proportions in my head, and I just thought like I can never write it because it's never going to be as good as it is in my head because I don't know that. And I think the reason I didn't write it when I first had the idea was I don't think I was good enough to do justice to the idea. Like I wasn't mature enough. I hadn't gone through enough life experiences. Um, and I think eventually I got to a point. I think Neil Gaiman said this about the Graveyard Book, that he had the idea, but he wasn't good enough, he felt at the time. And then he just got to a point where he thought, well, I'm not getting any better, so I might as well start it. So yeah, like 20 years it rattled around in my head. And then this new publisher, Valhalla Books, I had been in one of their anthologies. He asked if I would write a novel for him. And I thought, maybe it's time. And I sat down, and then it just poured out of me. I wrote it in 2 months. My big joke is it only took me 2 months, 20 years and 2 months. But yeah, it did, I'm not saying, I'm not tooting my own horn or making it out to be something it's not, but it is exactly the story I had hoped it would be. So I am very excited about it.
I will never accuse anyone doing the writing thing of being self-centered. And the reason for that is it's easy if you don't write not to understand this, but writing is about as much mental heavy lifting as you can do. I mean, I'm sure maybe the mathematicians that took us to the moon would differ in opinion, but I think for most of us, there's nothing in your life that is as much about balancing craft and creativity, bridging your conscious and your subconscious, because you need both to get this done. Creating characters that exist within a rational and sometimes irrational mind state that makes sense for the story. There's so much to balance that, you know what? Just doing it and coming out with something that's successful on any level, toot your own horn, because you want to know what? Sometimes going to the grocery store and following the list is the triumph for the day. And other days, you complete a short story in which you can't believe that everything came together. And it almost feels like it happened outside of you, not because it did, because I don't believe that at all. I don't think there's anything magical about writing. But what I think is true is that sometimes the accomplishments are so much bigger than we think we're capable of. They feel magical. So, no, dude, toot your horn. Be proud of what you've done, because anyone who's ever tried to do it understands.
Yeah. And I don't know. I get so excited about my work because I love it and I'm proud of it. And I've never published anything that I'm not proud of and that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. Like even when I look back at my early published work, is it up to the standards of what I might do today? No. But what I ask myself is it the best I could do at the time? And if the answer is yes, then I'm perfectly happy. And so yeah, I love what I do, and I'm proud of what I do, and I hope that enthusiasm is infectious, and everyone will go buy my books because I also need to make a buck.
Yeah, the bills keep coming, right? I think that's the thing
They
that no one thinks about. Like the electricity bill doesn't stop because we're writers.
No.
It's a crazy, crazy thing. So where do you see the future of yourself, of the genre, of your place in the future in the genre? What excites you and what scares the shit out of you?
Well, what excites me about the genre is I do think it just keeps expanding in terms of ideas, in terms of new voices. I that's why I love the small press. Like I said before, like it doesn't have a narrow idea of what you can do. Like in the small press, anything goes. and that excites me. Like, I love finding new writers, writers I haven't heard of. And I guess what I fear is that, because, in some circles, horror still has that reputation. Because I've definitely done events where people come by and they sort of very sweetly and well-intentioned say, "Oh yeah, I don't read that," and I'm like,
All the
"Oh,
time.
well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for stopping by to tell me you're not going to read my work." But I would love to see it gain more. And in film in particular, I feel like there are movies that sort of break out of that and just get recognized for the quality films they are. And I want to see that happen more on the literary side of things too, which does happen, but I want to see it more because I have such a love for this genre, and I recognize the quality that you can find in the genre. Yeah, you can find some low quality stuff, but you can find that in any genre you pick. Um, so I just, that's my hope for the genre, because I think it's probably stronger than it's been maybe even in my lifetime, because there are just so many new exciting voices out there. And as for myself, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, keep finding homes, keep finding readers, um, because it's what I love.
And Jamie's going to sneak in with the final question of the night. Do either of you have any rituals or superstitions in regard to your writing process?
I don't. I'm very adaptable. I just need to write, and at different times in my life, I've done it different ways. Right now, I get up every morning super early and write first thing when I get up. I feel like it's a great way to start the day. It gets my juices flowing, gets my energy up, um, and I find that I'm excited enough about my work that it helps me actually get up because I want to get to it. But I've definitely done it other ways. I used to have a job where I wrote at work. I was a security guard for a while. And I would write in these little pockets of time when I had downtime, which was sort of fragmented, but I made it work. So I can't say I have any particular rituals other than sitting down at the keyboard and doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to sound very similar. I mean, the only thing I'd say, and I don't think of it as a superstition or a ritual, it's just I write every day.
Yeah.
And there's times in my life when that means I'm going to produce 1,000 words a day or 800 words a day or 2,000 words a day. I'm not as concerned about that as I am about the process of sitting down, writing. Even if you're at a point where you're not feeling the greatest about it, sit down, do it, because it's like anything. It's not a magic process at all. The creativity is a separate issue, but the actual writing is a craft. And you step away from the craft for too long, let yourself get distracted, you do get worse at it.
Yeah.
That's what I find. I've definitely seen myself get rusty when I've made bad choices. So not a ritual, but definitely I think it's important that if you're going to call yourself a writer, you write. I don't like the word author. I think you can be the author of a work. I don't think that you are itself an author, because I think that that is a rarely deserved title. I like titles that describe what we actually do. So I think writer is an important word. I think it's more noble too. So it might sound like I'm just getting into diction, but the truth is it's core to how I look at it, which is that I don't want my accomplishments to be degraded by the idea that there's something magical or supernatural about what we do. We're not channeling anything. I just don't see it that way. And I'm not, if other people say they do see it that way, that's cool. But to me, I want my imagination recognized as my imagination. I want my craft recognized as my craft.
Yeah.
So,
and you have, like you said, you have to do the work. And I do write every day. And I don't really set like a word count or page limit. It's just, I'm going to write today and get it done.
Awesome. So, Mark, how can people stay in touch with you? I mean, there's a few links below the video already, but how can they stay in touch with you? How can they reach out to you? How can they buy a couple books and, keep your lights on?
Well, all my books are available on Amazon. You'll find some on barnesandnoble.com, maybe even a few on walmart.com. But they are readily available to all of you people. And I'm all over the internet. You can find me on Facebook, Mark Allan Gunnells, on Twitter at Mark A. Gunnells. I'm on Instagram as Make Reading Cool Again, where all I do is post pictures of books. And I have a blog that I didn't always, but I do update regularly now, markgunnells.livejournal.com, where I talk about writing, my work, but I also interview a lot of other writers on there. So any of those places, come say hello, we'll chat.
Awesome. And I hope everyone takes the bait. I hope you all dive deep and enjoy one of the most passionate voices and one of the best cheerleaders for the cause that horror has at the moment. It's funny, Mark and I have unfortunately never shared a table of contents, I don't think. But we've run in many of the same circles for a long time. So this feels almost like the culmination of something that was inevitable for us to actually sit down and have this talk. And your passion and your drive has always come through, but also your love for this, which is not always something that comes through with everyone. I'm not saying they don't have it, but some people are just so reserved that you can't get that they really, they've made this part of their core being, that it's deep down in their DNA. And we can see that in you, and you can definitely see it in the work.
Well, thank you. And thank you for letting me be on here, because I actually love your show and I watch it a lot. You interview some great people and you're great at it.
Well, I have some great people on my show. I'll say that. The rest of it might be up for debate. Just a note on that, guys. A lot of you know that I have some things going on, so you won't see much of me for the remainder of the month. I may jump onto some other people's shows if I'm feeling up to it, and it's kind of, just off the cuff, light lifting. But this show this channel will be a lot more restrained in the amount of uploads over the course of the coming couple weeks. But we will come back strong, especially going into the new month. I apologize for the pause, but I promise you it is just a pause. Do me a favor. If you have people out there that you think would enjoy the show, throw the word out to them. The channel will never be monetized. I'm never going to look for money for this. But what I do want is for us to get to be a large enough community that there's no voice that wouldn't come on the show and talk to you all and answer your questions. So I hope all of you have a good couple weeks, and I'll check in with you probably around the 27th. Any final words, Mark?
Just go read some books. Doesn't have to be mine. Just go read some books.
But they should be his.
You don't have to do that.
I think we do.